Hey folks, Rachel here with the end of chapter 9 of Acts. So, for the rest of this chapter so far, you've been hearing about Saul and that famous story of his conversion where he sees a bright light, gets blinded, and falls off his donkey and ends up converted to the way, which is what the early followers of Jesus were calling themselves after he had spent up to this point persecuting them pretty heavily. Now, at this last section of the chapter, we turn back to Peter, and the following chapter will focus on him again. This particular section is a couple of stories of healings. By this point, if you've been reading through the Gospels and you get to Acts, which is sort of the second volume of the Gospel according to Luke, you've seen a lot of healings, and it's maybe hard to kind of keep them separate or feel like they're new or special or anything like that. It's just sort of another healing. And so I think that one thing that really struck me in this passage is the way that despite how reticent, especially Hebrew narrative, but also a lot of these Greek narratives tend to be, the narrators still take the time to put in specific details about these characters that personalize the stories and that really make it something real. The thing that struck me in this one is this story of Peter raising Tabitha from the dead, which is already pretty dramatic and impressive in and of itself. But when he arrives, the people with her don't seem to expect him to do anything. They don't seem to expect him to raise her from the dead. They seem to think that he's just there to participate in mourning with them, much like the story of Lazarus in the Gospels, where they just want Jesus there to mourn. They're mad that he didn't get there sooner and Lazarus could have been healed, but by the time he gets there, they just want him to mourn with them. And it seems to be the same here. Peter arrives, and instead of asking him to heal her or raise her from the dead, all of Tabitha's friends are gathered around. All of the widows of the community are gathered around her body as it sits in state, and they're mourning. And Peter arrives, and they start telling stories about her life. They start showing him the garments that she had made them, because apparently she was a seamstress. And so they show him these treasures that they had from her life that they would remember her by. And of course, he then ends up raising her from the dead so that she can go on and continue making beautiful clothes for her community. But I think it's really wonderful that not only is it this incredibly human and normal moment of grief and storytelling and the beauty of remembering people who are special to us through the things that they made for us and the things that they did for us and the stories that they leave us with. Not only is it this incredibly human, real expression of what it means to be in the room with someone who has died, but it's also something it marks this story as particular to who Tabitha was, as opposed to any other person who might have been healed or raised from the dead by these disciples. And I think that's really cool. So as you're reading through Acts, I would encourage you to also look for those little details that jump out to you, those little personality characteristics that mark one of the characters in the narrative, or those little things that remind you of something from your own life. And these are the things that really make stories in the Bible stick with me. And I imagine that might do the same for you. Have a good weekend.